Today on Newsgirls, Trump taunts the Taliban.
Taking this airbase would require thousands of U.S. troops.
The government's now shut down. Millions are going without pay. The UN is pointless.
Netanyahu spoke at the UN, actively taking over Gaza City.
Russia has no intention of provoking NATO countries.
Chance for the UN to kind of reinvent itself.
And can Bad Bunny save the NFL?
I can't believe how much of a political talking point.
Pushing for more international audience.
The biggest surprises of this football season.
Hey everyone, welcome to Newsgirls.
I'm Wren.
And I'm Mabel.
Let's get into the stories. Mabel, seriously, how is it already October? This year is going so fast. I cannot believe it's already autumn, but there's a chill in the air. Everyone's drinking pumpkin spice lattes. But of course, we can't enjoy any of that because we have too much political stuff to break down today.
Yes, everyone, put on your comfy sweaters and strap in because it is time for another edition of Trumpdates.
I guess we should start with the fact that the government has been shut down for over 24 hours at this point. Both sides are classically blaming each other for it being shut down. Democrats are holding out to try to extend the Affordable Care Act tax credits, which expire at the end of the year. Because if they're not renewed, millions of people's healthcare would jump up in cost. They also want to reverse the Medicaid cuts that Republicans passed, and we remember the big, beautiful bill. And because the government's now shut down, millions of federal employees and even soldiers are going without pay. And this also means most national parks are closed. And Trump is making the situation worse by using this as an opportunity to actually lay people off. Usually government employees are just furloughed during this time, but he wants to actually use it to just do massive layoffs of thousands of employees that work in departments that he says don't align with his mission.
No, I saw that. I think that's why this shutdown is so different. To just give everyone kind of some context of what actually causes a government shutdown. So basically, the federal government can only spend money that's been appropriated by Congress, and that money runs out at the end of the fiscal year, which is September 30th, so just a couple days ago. And no one knows how long this will last. The shortest government shutdown was a couple hours, and the longest one was actually 34 days during Trump's first term. But experts are saying that this one will probably last a while because Democrats don't want to bend because they've been getting so much criticism from the last spending deal that they cut with Trump in March. And Republicans are basically saying, we control the House, we control the Senate. Democrats don't have any leverage. So it doesn't seem like anyone is really going to bend anytime soon. So the next time you need something from a vending machine, you might be using a Charlie Kirk coin.
It's so crazy.
Because apparently a pair of Republicans introduced a bill this week directing the U.S. Treasury to mint 400,000 silver dollar coins with Charlie Kirk's face on it. So on one side of the coin would be his face, and then on the other side would say the words, "Well done, good and faithful servant."
I didn't know you can just add anyone to a coin. Just for fun, even for a limited release thing.
Yeah. So apparently in the 1890s, Congress authorized commemorative coins to kind of celebrate American patriots. He would be the youngest person to be on a coin. And we've obviously seen the Trump administration go above and beyond to honor him. Obviously after he was assassinated, he was flown on Air Force Two with Vice President Vance. There might be a Charlie Kirk Day, Remembrance Day on October 14th.
Oklahoma has proposed a bill that all public colleges must have a statue of Charlie Kirk sitting at a table with an empty seat across from him. They have to put that up if this bill passes every single college in Oklahoma.
Oh my God, to show him debating someone or something?
Yeah, to show the idea that he's open to debating anybody.
Several House Republicans also wrote to Speaker Johnson to ask for a statue of him at the U.S. Capitol. So we'll just see if these things pass.
He wasn't an elected official.
No, it seems like the Trump administration is using his death as a way to kind of celebrate Republican rhetoric or something. At his memorial, everyone really talked about how this was a revival. That's what everyone was saying. So I guess putting him on a coin is the most tangible way to kind of cement him in American history.
Mabel, have you been following James Comey's indictment?
No, there's been so much going on, but I need you to break it down for me.
Okay, so I have to start with Trump's Truth Social that announced that he was indicted. So he posted, "Justice in America. One of the worst human beings this country has ever been exposed to, James Comey, the former corrupt head of the FBI. Today, he was indicted by a grand jury on 2 felony counts for various illegal and unlawful acts."
But what? So this happened, it seems out of nowhere. Why is he attacking him right now?
So he's been trying to get one of the U.S. attorneys based in Virginia to bring charges against his political opponents for a while, including James Comey. But that attorney actually was forced out because he didn't feel like he had reservations about bringing them. So then he hired his former personal attorney and appointed her as U.S. attorney. And now she's like, yeah, I'll bring this case, even though legal experts are saying it's extremely weak. There's barely any grounds. They're even saying it's going to be an embarrassment for the Department of Justice because of how absurd these charges are. So he's charged with 2 counts, 1 count of making false statements under oath and 2 of obstructing justice.
So what are these counts referring to? Like, when would he have done that?
So it goes back to a Senate hearing in 2020 when Comey was being questioned about 2 FBI investigations, one about Russian interference in the 2016 election and one about Hillary Clinton's emails. And Senator Ted Cruz asked Comey if he had approved an FBI leak about those investigations years prior. And he said no, he had no knowledge that this FBI leak was being made. But Andrew McCabe, who had been the guy who leaked the FBI information, had said that he had done it with Comey's knowledge. But McCabe also kind of has a track record for making misleading statements. Not like he's like the most reliable witness to this. So now Trump is like coming at Comey saying, no, he was aware of this and he blatantly lied and obstructed justice when he said he didn't know about this leak.
So what's going to happen now? Like, how long is this expected to drag out? Like, what are the next steps?
Well, Comey immediately posted a video being like, bring it on, let's go to trial. Like, he's like really baiting them. A lot of legal experts say it's not even going to get to a trial because it's so flimsy. And one argument that Comey could try to use to get this dismissed is saying that this is clearly a product of vindictive prosecution. And historically, that's a really tough like rebuttal to prove in this case because it's so clear, like the paper trail of Trump hating Comey. He actually might have a good basis to make that argument. So he will appear before a judge next week. So we'll see what happens then.
So 1,200 people are missing from Alligator Alcatraz, which we all remember is that Florida detention center that the state spent $200 million basically creating in 8 days. And so as of July, there were 1,800 detainees in this detention center. And as of late August, 2/3 of the 1,800 people are missing from ICE's online database, and their family literally can't locate them.
I mean, that's horrific. Like, where could they even be?
When you look them up on like the ICE online database, 800 of them were literally missing and had no records. And 450 of them had a result that says call ICE for details. And so reporters like asked attorneys, what does this notation mean? And they said it could mean a number of things, like these detainees are being moved from one facility to another, or that they were being secretly deported. And so there's this example of this Cuban national who was basically held in Alligator Alcatraz for like a couple months. And then he was moved to a San Diego facility and his family was like notified that he was moved. And then one day they didn't hear from him anymore. Like they couldn't find him, they couldn't locate him. And they went to the facility and they were like, he's not coming up. When we search him, go to ICE. So they went to ICE, that referred them back to the facility. So there was just this ongoing thing of not knowing where he was. And then weeks later, they found out he was like secretly sent to Mexico, even though he's from Cuba. And he basically came all the way from Alligator Alcatraz, which we know again is this state-run detention facility. So it was shut down because there were all these like claims of abuse. Now a federal appeals court actually said that it can run. We don't know what's happening there, but we do know that all of these people are missing.
So Trump is preparing to bail out Argentina's government by giving them $20 billion to try to save their current libertarian president, Milei, who I guess they're like allies, because Trump thinks this will help with his re-election campaign if he is campaigning with not being in like economic chaos in his country. But I guess Argentina has such a terrible track record of defaulting on their debt that even Republicans are like, this is such a poor use of taxpayer money. Yeah. And also, what happened to America first? Why are we solving Argentina's problems?
And it's just funny because what happened to like USAID cuts? He's cutting all of this like help for people around the world, but he's spending all of this money to help out his friends. As if there isn't enough going on, have you heard that Trump is causing drama with the Taliban?
I mean, I saw his Truth Social post, but I don't know more than that.
So ever since the U.S. withdrew from Afghanistan in 2021, Trump has said that it was a mistake because the U.S. should keep control of this airbase there. It's this like really big, long airbase called Bagram Air Base. And so he was Truth Socialing last week saying, we want this airbase back because China is making nuclear weapons really close to the area. And it's important to note that no one has yet been able to verify that China is actually making nuclear weapons there. But the problem is that it would require a negotiated deal with the Taliban, who, of course, don't want American presence there. They've finally got rid of the US presence after 20 years. So the leader of the Taliban, like, tweeted on X being like, there's no way that we're giving you this. Remember the deal that we made? Even taking this airbase would require thousands of US troops or more. And now Trump is like escalating things by threatening the Taliban, saying bad things are going to happen if Afghanistan does not give the base back to the US.
Okay, I just finished Kamala Harris's new memoir, 107 Days, and I have so many thoughts. So she said that Pete Buttigieg was actually her first choice for VP, but didn't think America was ready for like a woman of color and a gay man. And it only would have worked if she was a white man. And then she said Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro was so confident that he was going to be chosen that he was asking her staff how he could lease out art for the vice president's residence.
So embarrassing.
And then he also said in the interview process that as VP, he'd like to be, quote, in the room for all the major decisions.
Didn't even pick you yet.
Yeah. And so she thought that he would never be okay being number two and that he would want to be like co-president. And then she went through how all of like the notable Democrats responded to her candidacy. It was obviously such a shock to everyone. So she said Bill and Hillary were immediately supportive and immediately wanted to like put out a statement like endorsing her. And then she said Barack and Michelle were also super excited, but thought that they should wait a bit. Pelosi, though, as we knew, really pushed for a primary like vote at the DNC convention. And then the funniest one was she called Gavin Newsom and he didn't respond. So he texted her, "I'm hiking, call you later," and he never called back. They never like spoke again. She says it was pretty reckless of her, that was her word, to not try to dissuade Joe from running again, but she was worried about bringing up any concerns of him running again because it could just seem self-serving. She reveals a lot about her relationship with Joe Biden. Clearly have a lot of like respect and love for each other, but then it gets like muddy sometimes. Like she clearly has resentment against him for his gaffes during the campaign that then she had to clean up. Joe Biden can be like very full of himself. And 1 hour before Kamala's debate with Trump, Joe Biden called under the guise of like, "Hey kid, like wishing you well, like you're gonna crush it." And then immediately segued into, "I hear like my aides are telling me you're talking shit about me." Like an hour before the debate.
Oh.
And she was like, I was just so shocked that he called to say this. She said it wasn't even true. But in general, I thought the book was really interesting just to see behind the curtain. And like she went into it truly not even questioning, like knowing they were going to win. And then when she realized it didn't, and like she gets like, she writes emotionally.
Does she give any indication throughout the book about like whether she's going to run again?
She's not sure if the system can be fixed from within. And like you might have to be like apart from the system to fix it, but that now she really wants to focus on having conversations with people, like figuring out other ways I think she can help. But I still wouldn't be surprised if like she does go back to realizing that being president would be a pretty big way you could fix the system.
So we all watched in shock last week as Trump took the stage at the UN 80th General Assembly meeting in New York and basically just like berated world leaders and the UN in general for being like an inefficient waste of money. And it was just shocking for us to see because there's so much going on in the world with like wars raging on in Gaza and Ukraine and Sudan, and the UN dealing with billions of dollars of budget cuts and even like authoritarianism on the rise around the world. We just kind of were left after looking at all the meetings. What do all these like fancy speeches and meetings actually lead to? Like, what is the point of the UN in today's world?
So we're speaking to Maya Ungar from the Crisis Group to break down what is the purpose of the UN. And she recaps what happened last week with Trump, Israel, Palestine, Russia, Ukraine, the budget cuts, the upcoming Secretary General election, and way more.
Trump obviously gave his UN speech last week, and everyone was pretty shocked by how like harshly he was criticizing not only world leaders, but the UN itself. So what kind of impact do you think a speech like that has on the UN and just kind of its reputation around the world?
I mean, he told world leaders that their countries were all going to hell. That was one of the remarks that really stuck with me the most. So I think in that relative sense, people were not as upset as they could have been about the remarks that came out from President Trump. Like, I didn't see it as a worst case scenario speech for the institution. He said some very harsh remarks, particularly on migration, the way in which he kind of accused the UN of allegedly funding and creating an invasion against the US's southern border. But in other aspects, he actually mentioned one area where he felt like the UN would be able to play a positive or a constructive role and seemed to call for the UN to be engaging more heavily with him, instead of just saying this is a demise of the institution.
Trump has been so critical of the UN and has called it a waste of money, obviously cutting the budget and everything.
Mhm.
Is there a chance that the UN headquarters could be moved out of the US?
So I think that the headquarters will stay, particularly the functions as they relate to peace and security. But I do think a lot of elements will be moved out of the US. This past month, for example, UN Women announced that they would be moving about 35% of their staff that are currently based in New York to Bonn in Germany and to Nairobi in Kenya. And so we're expecting to see further movements in the future. Nairobi, Bonn, Seville in Spain, Bangkok, Istanbul, Bogota, these are different headquarters that the UN already has an existing presence in that we've been hearing discussed for movements of the institution.
We do understand that the US is no longer really the nation that is like leading the UN or like sitting at the helm. And there seems to be a bit of like a power vacuum. So we wanted to ask you, who do you think will maybe step up to fill the role? Because we've heard some whisperings of like maybe China wanting to get more involved, which was surprising.
I think in some areas we're absolutely seeing China taking on a greater role. I think one area is climate. It was really telling to see Trump had his big speech, really shutting down elements of green energy. And then the next day, Xi Jinping made a surprise appearance at a climate-related event at the sidelines of UN High Level Week and announcing all these commitments on green energy. But at the same time, China is going to invest in a very targeted strategic way for them. They traditionally were the most stringent against increases in UN financing of any member state. I think that other interesting players like the Gulf countries are going to be someone to watch. We've seen the Gulf countries take on a pretty significant role as middle powers in mediation, and they've been looking to kind of expand their influence.
So obviously, the Israel-Palestine conflict took center stage last week. The UN Commission, we thought this was interesting, itself conducted an investigation and declared just a few weeks ago that Israel is committing genocide in Gaza, and yet Netanyahu spoke at the UN as the Israeli military was actively taking over Gaza City. And so we're kind of left wondering, like, what can the UN even do at this point?
It's a really important critique, and I think one that many have been voicing over the past week and honestly months since October 7th. Last week, the more important part was actually the behind the scenes discussions, a select group, for example, of Arab leaders and Donald Trump to discuss what's happening in Gaza. And I think that actually the UN as a platform for these behind the scenes dialogue, which is something that the majority of us don't get a chance to see, is where a lot of the real action and utility of the UN as a convening space and platform rests for it here in New York. On the second front, the UN really is the only entity that is capable of providing the amount of humanitarian aid and assistance necessary to provide for the situation in Gaza, people starving, people without shelter. So this does raise that existential question of Security Council reform and the idea of how effective can an institution be when you have 5 members who are able to stop the will of potentially 192 others. If we don't have the UN, if we don't have this rules-based order anymore, it's not just that we won't be able to have as many meetings here in New York, right? It's that less people are going to get food, less people are going to get vaccinated, smaller countries are no longer going to have a court system to be able to bring broad issues to,
Another topic we wanted to get your take on that we know there's a lot of attention on was Russia. The foreign minister said that Russia has no intention of provoking NATO countries and only that it would fight back against aggression, even though they're also the ones who have been performing these flyovers with drones and even fighter jets to at least 4 NATO countries. What was the response to these remarks? Like, if that's the case, then what are they trying to prove with these flyovers?
To be frank, I don't think the Europeans really believed at all the Russian statements here. There's a few different theories of what the implications of this are. One is to try to intimidate forces away from this kind of cohesive coalition of the willing, providing troops, weapons, and support essentially, potentially to Ukraine. I had a discussion with a Baltic state last week who said, us investing in Ukraine is investing in our own national security, in our own national defense. It's cheaper to do that than it is to fight a war ourselves. So I think depending on how far people are away from the Russian border, that changes the way and how impactful that is. I think there's also a bit of a testing of the red lines of NATO, and a testing of what the US response will be. Russia does a really good job of completely redrawing the red lines, is they'll push inches and inches and inches forward to the point where all of a sudden things that previously were the middle compromise ground are now the absolute red lines for them.
We have heard that there might be a scaling back of human rights investigations to save money, and that's being pushed by countries like Iran, China, and Russia. And that really shocked us. Like, what are experts saying about this?
Yeah, the budget crisis is absolutely existential for the organization. For those of us who spend our waking days, unfortunately, just thinking about the United Nations, like this is the absolute thing top of mind. So there are two main reasons why we are in such a bad liquidity crisis right now. The first is that member states have not been paying their dues in full, and the second is that they have not been paying them on time. The real two big perpetrators of this are the US and China, simply because they together make up almost half of the entire budget of the United Nations. The US is really, really bad about paying their budget to the United Nations. What's really interesting is this actually stems from Ronald Reagan, where Reagan made a campaign promise that he said he wanted to cut X amount of money from the US budget. But the UN budget cycle and the US budget cycle are different. And so he just delayed payment until October. He was able to say he like fulfilled this campaign promise, saving, X amount of dollars for the US economy. Every president since have had to keep to that schedule. Otherwise, it would look like to taxpayers that they're increasing this $1 billion plus. And what was happening previously wasn't sustainable. It's not just President Trump's fault, but he has significantly exacerbated the speed of it, which is why the Secretary General has introduced this reform.
And we know that this current Secretary General, his term will be up the end of next year. There's obviously going to be a lot of weight on the shoulders of whoever is next. Could you tell us what the process is to elect a new Secretary General?
Yeah, so great question, because this is really last week is when things started heating up. You've seen a few names starting to come out. The way that a Secretary General election works is that typically it is supposed to switch between regions. So this is supposed to be Latin America's turn to have a Secretary General. There has been a huge push that it should be a woman, as the Secretary General has never been a woman. Now, the rhetoric on this changed a lot when Trump came into office. All of a sudden, the US is pushing back significantly, saying, gender shouldn't be a determining factor. But there's about 5 or 6 candidates that have been really making their names known. Usually, Secretary Generals previously were high-level politicians in another life. Some of the other candidates that we're hearing, Michelle Bachelet, the former president of Chile. You have Rebecca Greenspan from Costa Rica. You have Maria Fernanda Espinosa, the former foreign minister of Ecuador. You have Rafael Grossi from Argentina, who is the main male candidate in the race right now, and I would say has the most momentum of any candidate.
For our last question, what are some of the big picture patterns you think we'll see? Like, the US is taking a step back. Do we think other countries will do the same? Like this new Secretary General?
It's a really interesting question. I think one immediate pattern is that you're going to see a lot more targeted investment in the UN versus the kind of core or broad support that you previously saw from member states. If you're a European country, you're contributing more to your national security, looking towards Ukraine. You're going to see member states who provide a lot more earmarked funds, which is going to mean that you're going to have very certain kind of areas of interest for member states prioritized over what the organization strategically thinks is best. I think on the second, you're going to have a Secretary General who is trying to keep the organization afloat. Personality does matter here. I think that's something we've really learned with the Trump administration in particular, is that these world leaders and so much of global politics, a lot of that is personality politics. And so the new SG is a chance for the UN to kind of reinvent itself to a limited respect in some ways. There's a quote that always has really resonated with me, which was from Dag Hammarskjöld, one of the early Secretary Generals, who said, "The UN was not created to bring us to heaven. It was created to try to save us from hell." Because the reality is that if the UN is not there, a lot of the time, no one is.
So if you're like us and you don't religiously follow football, but you want to be able to watch a game here or there and kind of have an idea of what's going on, you might also feel like it's so daunting to even try to do that because you're like, how can I even jump in? I don't know anything. We got you.
Yes, we're speaking to Andrew Fenichel, a sports content creator. We spoke to him a couple months ago about Cooper Flag, and you guys all loved that piece, so we had to have him back on to kind of just explain what's happening in the NFL, teams to watch out for, the halftime show, and just some big picture NFL drama that's going on.
So, Drew, thank you so much for coming back to the show. Just to set the scene in general, what have been the biggest surprises of this football season so far?
It's been a few. I'll give you one team that's been doing a lot better than people thought, especially myself, and I'll give you one team that's kind of fallen off the map. So the Indianapolis Colts, people, including myself, predicted to finish last in their division. They're like the hottest show in the NFL right now. And what's so funny about them is their quarterback is brand new this year. He wasn't even supposed to be the starter. And now he's like in MVP conversations. They didn't punt a single time in their first 3 games. That's like unfathomable in football. They're looking like a guaranteed playoff team. On the other side, you have the Baltimore Ravens, who, of course, Lamar Jackson, MVP type of guy, won the award twice. They're 1-3. They have a bunch of injuries now. Like nothing's going right with them.
We know it's really early, but do you have any like Super Bowl predictions? Like, can you give us some of the practical ones and maybe like an out of the box one you're like hoping or something?
Oh, I like that. I like that. I'll stick with my prediction that I made before the season, which was Bills over Eagles. Eagles won it last year. They've been a little shaky. I mean, I still think they're a great team, but the Bills are like your friend who's chronically single and then finally like breaks through and finds like the woman of his dreams. They look great. So I'll stick with that as my like realistic prediction. As far as a like slightly out of the box one, I'll take the Tampa Bay Buccaneers out of the NFC. They're a good team. No one really believes in them, partly because they're in like Tampa Bay, Florida, not a huge market. I think they're going to win that division, and I think they can take down pretty much anybody on the right day.
So, what do you think about the Chiefs, though? I know they got off to a rockier start than people were expecting. Do you think they have any chance? Like, do you think they're going to turn it around?
Of course, they're the
Okay.
Chiefs. Like, you know what I mean? Like, no one wants to root for the Chiefs really anymore. But as long as they have Patrick Mahomes, they're going to be.
Okay. Other than like millions of Swifties who really
Good
want
correction. Right, right. Other than the entire like music industry. Right.
to.
Yeah, fair. But the reason no one in the football community loves rooting for them is because they're just so good. They're always there every single
Yeah.
year, right? They're also not as fun to watch anymore.
Mm.
That's sort of the other storyline with the Chiefs. When they were kind of blowing up, it was because they were this high-powered offense. You had Travis Kelce dominating. They had Tyreek Hill in his prime. This was this like flashy sort of like underdog story of this guy, Patrick Mahomes, who didn't even go to like a big time, super big time school. And then recently they've become less of an offensive team and more of a defensive team. So that's also part of it. It's like watching the same TV show 8 times and you kind of always know the ending.
Well, the Chiefs are a good transition to talking about WAGs. So obviously that's like wives and girlfriends of professional athletes. They obviously have been getting a lot of flack for being distractions. And obviously Taylor Swift has kind of set that to a new level because everyone's talking about her every time she's at a game. So you as a football fan, how do you feel about the WAGs and all of the attention? Because it is bringing new audiences, but I'm sure it's like kind of annoying.
No, is it? I
I
like
don't
it.
know.
I'm
People
here for
complain
it.
about it a lot. Everyone's like so sick of all the attention.
Yeah, because people complain about everything on the internet these days. Here's what I always say about it. If you go to any post the NFL makes about Taylor Swift, or any post Major League Baseball makes about Livy Dunn, right, who's dating the best pitcher in baseball, or Josh Allen, Haley Steinfeld, right? Any of these like super power couples, there's a lot of hate in the comments. There's also a reason these accounts keep posting them. Clearly, it's bringing in new fans to the sport, which is awesome. It's also like I think at one point the NFL was going a little overboard with it, right? I mean, but also at the end of the day, like, okay, great, they cut to her in the box 4 times a game. For the other 3 hours, you're watching football.
That's our perspective, so we're glad that you
Yeah.
see that. So talking about another peripheral of the sport, we wanted to get into like the halftime show because obviously Bad Bunny was just announced as the halftime performer. Do you have any thoughts of kind of why they went with him and what the strategy might have been?
I can't believe how much of like a political talking point this has become. I mean, like, as I'm sure you guys have seen, Bad Bunny's not touring in the US because he basically came out and said, I'm worried ICE is going to come to my show. So then that turns into, okay, yeah, sure, but you took the Super Bowl gig, right? Which is, I guess hypocritical. I don't know, but also you can't really blame Bad Bunny for taking the Super Bowl gig because it is the Super Bowl. Yeah, I mean, look, as far as the NFL goes, it makes total sense. They're trying to become a more international league. There's no one bigger internationally than Bad Bunny.
He's probably going to make some political statement during the show, I'm sure, to justify to himself why he's breaking his like
Sure.
barring
Yeah.
of himself from performing in the US is that he sees this as like the biggest platform. So many references to Puerto Rican culture.
Yeah, Kendrick made statements during his
Yep.
halftime show. Beyonce made statements during her halftime show. That's almost what the halftime show has become now. It's notorious that these artists don't get paid for it. So it really is like the ultimate artistic marketing.
And speaking of the NFL getting more political, we wanted to talk about Charlie Kirk because we know at least 9 teams did something to honor him shortly after he was killed. Some held a moment of silence, some put the flag at half staff. And, a lot of critics are saying they didn't do this for mass shootings, they didn't do this for school shootings. Why are they just doing this for this guy? As a football fan, are you worried about the league? What if this becomes more normal? What if they become more political?
From a fan's perspective, it's interesting because objectively, like I've never had issues with sports or with politics integrating into sports because I just think it's inevitable, right? Like athletes are now influencers politically, right? Like like there's so much crossover in these two worlds, especially I feel like here in the US, that like shut up and dribble is always so dumb because it's impossible, right? So as a fan, I guess maybe I'm just used to it, dating back to the Kaepernick days. I'm also a big UFC fan, and the UFC is like totally in bed with Donald Trump, even,
Yeah.
as I'm sure you heard about, they're doing this fight on July 4th next year at the White House. I think specifically the Charlie Kirk thing, these NFL team owners skew very Republican, very conservative, very red. To me as a fan, especially, I don't think it really affects the product.
Another controversy we wanted your take on. We're sure you saw how Travis and a couple other Chiefs players were wearing free four shirts. Four is obviously Rashid Rice's number. He's been suspended. This says a lot. Swifties were very upset that Travis was wearing that.
Swifties are on it. I mean, yeah, as they should be. I don't know what the argument to free four is. The guy was going 119, injured, I think, 7 people. Someone fact checked me on that and caused like a major high-speed collision and is now facing 2 felonies.
And then
There's no
fled the
free four.
scene.
What do we?
Yeah.
Yeah, freedom of his driver's license. Look, that's their boy, right? This was also, I believe, in week 3 when the Chiefs were really struggling offensively, as I was talking about earlier. So Rashid is going to be a huge deal on the field for them once he returns.
I guess to like zoom out a little bit, you mentioned how the NFL is kind of pushing for more of an international audience. Just a couple of days ago, there was an announcement about how the NFL is planning to play 8 international games a season, and they're aiming for like 16 or 18. What do you think of that? Like, it was surprising to us because it's obviously American football. Like, you don't think of it as a global sport, but like, what is going on here?
I'm going to one of them in 2 months, so talk to
Cool.
me then. Yeah, again, my team is playing in Madrid, which should be cool. So I'm gonna fly out for that. Again, I think it's all a business move, right? The NBA has crushed as a international product. And I assume that's sort of what the NFL is looking at, the success the NBA has had. I think it's 25% of the NBA is now, players born outside of the US. I think the last what is it, like 8 MVPs or something, 6 NBA MVPs are international players, right? From Giannis and Luka and Jokic and all these guys. So, and yeah, I'm here for it.
And it seems like it's another way, like you're saying, to kind of get viewers because we've seen that there is this continuing drop in viewership. So, can you tell us big picture wise, like what moves are we seeing from the league to regain its audience and kind of skew younger?
It's a good question. I mean, with the viewership, real quick, specifically, yeah, 2.3% drop off. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if overall across the board TV viewership was down like 5% last year, and comparatively, it's not that bad. I think these things ebb and flow, especially with all these new streaming services. To answer your question about like younger viewers, I think they're definitely diving a lot more into social. they're embracing all these cultural things. They did a game exclusively on YouTube, which was super cool. Chargers played the Chiefs on a Friday night, and they had like I Show Speed, the Twitch streamer. He was doing like a alt broadcast, and they had another YouTuber doing a broadcast, and they had a bunch of other content creators on the field as sideline reporters. So they're definitely like leaning into that side of it too, which I think is great. They should call me maybe one day.
Yeah. I was
Right?
just gonna say, like,
Yeah, Roger,
where
if
are
you're watching
you?
this, let me
Yeah, if you're
know.
watching Newsgirls.
So, our last question, just hypothetically, if maybe someone wasn't watching every week and like glued to the games, what would be the best way to kind of catch up and be able to jump in to where we are now?
You know what's funny? My answer might be start sports betting. You know,
No,
like
You cannot
responsibly,
advocate for that.
responsibly, and maybe with my promo code. I mean, I say that because like it does get you to care about what you're watching, right? Other than that, I would say just like start by watching one game a week. Watch the Thursday night game, then watch maybe one game on Sunday night, watch the Monday night game, and then just subscribe to my channel. That'd be the other way. Watch my content. I'll get you caught up.
Thanks for tuning in, everyone. Make sure to like and subscribe.
And join us next week for Mabel and my official review of Taylor Swift's brand new album coming out tomorrow. You will get all of our thoughts.
Bye.